Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of the Puerto Rico Skyview channel. My name is Emmanuel Santiago and today I am bringing you the camera basics for 2022, but these three basic things are the most important settings that you will encounter in any camera. You could be using a drone, you could be using your phone, you can be using a Canon, Sony, Nikon camera, and you will always have to deal with these three things, which are ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Oh yeah, that's right. Those three settings will be in any camera regardless of the combination of buttons, technology that you're using, because nowadays cameras are or can be very complicated devices. They can struck fear in each of the beginner's minds, but hey, don't lose your mind. I'm here for you. When I started my journey as a photographer and videographer, I used to be dialing in settings. I used to be experimenting with settings to achieve the highest quality possible, or to use the camera for certain techniques and stuff. And I always found myself manipulating the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed. Now, for the benefit of you, I will be making a short guide here with settings for both photography and videography. When I started, it was madness because all of the videos were concentrating on video or concentrated on photo. But nowadays we have cameras, hybrid cameras, really nice cameras that you can use for either photo and video on your daily life. So back in the day, I used to write all of those settings down, but hey, you can subscribe. Consider subscribing, watching this video a ton of times. It will be here for free for you to use and to improve your quality, because I will be sharing tips and tricks alongside these three settings, which I call basic, but they are the most important basic settings that you will be using on a daily basis during paid work or during hobby. It doesn't really matter. All of the cameras have them, and if you want to become a pro, or if you want to improve your game a little bit or by a ton, please stick around and we will begin right now. Okay, so let's begin with the easiest of the three, which is the ISO. The ISO is often very feared by beginners because ISO, they don't really know what they mean, what it means or anything. It's just a measure, a value that measures the sensitivity to light of the camera's sensor. That's why the camera sensor, if you have an ISO value that is higher, your image will appear brighter. But there's a problem with that, and this is tip number one. If you have a higher ISO value on your camera, it will introduce a lot of grain, a lot of noise. The image quality will suffer a lot. The color contrast will be very poor. And I have an example in photography for you. Here, as you can see, the low value, it was around 50, I believe, 50 or 100. This image is superb in quality. It has a lot of sharpness, it has a lot of color contrast. There's barely visible grain there. Grain structure is almost non-existent. It is a pristine image. But what happens if I raise the ISO way above what I shot this photo with? There you can see a lot of grain, a lot of the color contrast was lost because of the increased ISO value when taking the image. The same can be said for video. If you raise up or you crank up the ISO, you will lose quality, you will lose color contrast, a lot of grain structure will be set into your footage, and in some cases, footage may not be usable anymore, as you can see from these images. Now, moving up to our next setting, which is the aperture. The aperture is my beloved setting, is my most favorite setting of all three that I'm teaching you right now, because it is the responsible for bokeh, and very often the aperture could be defined as the one setting that will let more light into your camera sensor. And light is very important because the word photography, that particle that says photo, it means light in Greek. So you basically want the most light to create the most beautiful images. That's what I think in my experience. Now, as you can see in this image, the lower the value of that aperture, the more light you will bring into the sensor, the more bokeh you will have. And bokeh is that soft and out of focus background that people love to see in pictures and video. In every aspect of photography and videography, it's a very desired look, and you can achieve this easily by lowering the aperture in your lens. Now, you can see by the other image has a higher aperture value, which reduces that dramatic effect of softening your background, but you will still retain more detail and your image will be looking more sharp. So it is very important to find a balance between sharpness and softness, and that's something that you can control via your aperture. Some lenses or some cameras have apertures lower than others, so that means that you could easily create more out of focus backgrounds with some equipment. So bear in mind when buying equipment, if you want more light into the sensor, softer backgrounds, a softer image, you would be looking at lenses with lower apertures. I have found that if you have an f4 lens, you could still produce bokeh, and most affordable lenses are f4 upwards, and you will be definitely okay. But if you want dramatic results to create what you are envisioning, or to get a softer, very soft image, I deeply recommend you look into lenses that are f2.8 or lower in aperture, which you can find these days, cheap lenses that are 1.8, 2.0, or even 2.8 in aperture. Now, for our final setting. This final setting is the shutter speed. Shutter speed, there's a little bit of a difference between photo and video, because for photos, as you can see in this image, if you want to froze those images, if you want to froze them in time, get your subject tack sharp even if it's moving fast, you raise your shutter speed up and you should be very close to perfection in terms of what you are shooting or what you're going for. But if you require motion blur, for example in this image, which has a river and the water is flowing and you want to capture the movement, that motion, that very desirable white water look, you have to lower your shutter speed by almost 2 seconds. And what that does is that it will keep the sensor exposed for 2 seconds, gathering information, and there you will be seeing that motion blur that basically turns your water white. You can see the rocks here look very sharp because the rocks are very still, they don't move, so they won't have any motion blur. But in landscape photo like this one, a lower shutter speed could be very desirable. Even though beginners always think as photography as freezing time, but sometimes we want to capture movement to make our photos more natural, and in this case the flow of water captured by a low shutter speed can be really appealing. Now for video it's a different story, because for video there's a simple rule that is doubling your shutter speed, taking into account your frames per second. For example, if you are shooting at 30 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/60. If you're shooting, let's say 60 frames per second, yes, 1/120. So you have to multiply your frames per second by 2 in order to set your shutter speed at the correct shutter angle. That's what they call the 180 shutter angle rule. It's very easy. You just take your frames per second, multiply it by 2, set your shutter speed, and leave it as is. This is the purpose of this rule is just to introduce the correct amount of motion blur, so that your video mimics what the human eye sees when you move your hand, or when you are running, you have a fast moving subject and you want to capture the emotion of the motion. Well, the shutter speed is the way to go in order to achieve those things in video. Now guys, for you beginners that are starting out in photography or videography, there are a quite huge selection of cameras that you can choose from. My recommendations, if you're starting out or if you want to own your first camera, look into, for example, a Canon M50, a Sony Alpha 6000 I believe, and the Nikon C50. Those cameras can go quite cheap on the second-hand market, and they are reliable. They will bring a battery, lens, basically they will get you started up and running so you can go out, start practicing, and enjoy your time out there. So guys, if you have found this video helpful, please like the video, consider subscribing, and I will be seeing you guys in the next video.